So you want to take a plunge in the orange ocean, the sun-kissed sea. You want to buy a motorcycle built for Kyles, by Kyles, and sold by Kyles. Well, consider this choice deeply, my young squidlet, because once you buy your first KTM, you too will become an insufferable bleed orange fanboy literally overnight. It doesn't matter if you pick up one of their 9,000 different dirt bikes, an RC390, or go full bananas with the Super Duke R, you're just one purchase away from being a lifetime KTM simp. Ask the guys over at Revzilla. If you think I'm joking, just look at Spite. He was all Team Honda with that overgrown Japanese Panigale. Now he literally won't shut up about his new Supermoto. But then is that just Eurobike life en masse? Well, yes and no. You see, a Ducatista will have a smug air of superiority, but as they roll up to the bike night on their two-wheeled Ferrari, a Beamer boy will quote the pamphlets telling you how their engine is 0.00001 gram lighter over last year's model like the ultimate spec sheet warrior they are, and the Triumph guy probably missed the meetup because he was having electrical issues and his bike wouldn't start. But the KTM guy will Kool-Aid man his way into any conversation, all ready to espouse the virtues of their orange overlords in Austria. You do have to give credit where credit's due though. KTM has been making better and better bikes year over year, and today we're going to talk about one of the more recent additions to the lineup, the Duke 790 and 890. A pair of naked bikes that want to play in the crowded middleweight naked market, but did KTM do it right, or did they make a small brain Harley Davidson move and create an underpowered and overpriced naked bike in some Me Too dash to compete? Well, you know how this works. Today we're going to throw the 790 and 890 through the ringer and see how they do against some fierce competition. But first, you cannot go full Euro boy with a pube forest so thick that Lewis and Clark would get lost in there. You're definitely going to want to roll up to the beach on your fancy new bike and show everything off in a color match banana hammock. And can you imagine all those scraggly looking pubes billowing out of the sides and the top and maybe even the back? Sure, you'd be turning heads, but for all the wrong reasons. You need to trim yourself up, my dude. It'll save you a lifetime of unending shame, and it only takes a few seconds with the Lawnmower 3.0. This thing's got more torque than a Busa, a higher redline than a 675R, and razor sharp handling so you can get the job done right the first time. You're also not going to need to worry about all that power chopping your junk off thanks to a skin-safe blade and patented ceramic technology. But it doesn't stop there. You can get yourself a weed whacker to trim your nose hairs, the Shears 2.0 to give yourself a lovely manicure, and an entire suite of ball destankifiers and deodorants so you can feel as good as you look. Click the link down below, use the code Yammie for 20% off your order and free shipping. Be like me, be clean, get yourself a dang ball shaver. Trust me, it's worth it. Alright, now the Duke line started way back in the day in 1994, if you can believe it, with the 620 Duke, which was KTM's first street bike, and was basically just a supermoto. It was a 609cc single that made 55 horse and 44 foot-pounds of torque. It was cursed with motorcycling's original sin, carburetors, and it weighed in around 360 pounds wet. It was also extremely ugly, and that's saying a lot in a world where the Honda Rune exists. But building an ugly motorcycle was kind of KTM's thing for a while. Depending on who you ask, they still do, but hey, different strokes for different folks. They followed that up with the 640 Duke in 98, the 690 in 08, and the 690R in 2013. Interestingly, electronics started to only become available in 2012 in the 696. And the 690 platform uses the LC4 engine, which they refined and redesigned several times throughout the life cycle since it wasn't exactly what you might call reliable. Even now, the jury's out after 30 years of tweaks. But KTM dropped the 690 like a hot potato in 2014 when they released the Beast. That's right, it was the year of the Hypernaked, and out of nowhere, KTM said, here, have a 180 horsepower V-twin supermoto that weighs 440 pounds. I don't care. And the Super Duke was born. Bonkers doesn't even begin to describe it. It was a 1301cc V-twin poached from the RC8R, which was their production superbike, which they also seemed to just send off into the good night, much to my chagrin. Now just imagine this. You're a motorcycle buyer in 2014 and you want power. You walk into the dealership and you look at all the Japanese leader bikes, you spy an R1, it's doing pretty well, pumping out 182 horse, but it looks a little bit dated. You walk past the Gen 2 Busa and it looks like a personal massager, but it's putting down 196 horsepower. But then out of the corner of your eye, you spot this goofy looking black and orange motorcycle putting down 180 horsepower, and it won't have you all folded up like a gargoyle, nor have you mercilessly clowned on by a bald guy on YouTube a few years later. It's really no wonder that the Super Duke took off. They've been updating it and tweaking it to the point where the 2020 Super Duke R has spaceship grade tech and an $18,500 price tag, but unfortunately for most people, it was way more power than they would ever need or be able to use, reviews, and KTM kinda knew it. So while the Super Duke was blowing everyone's minds and stealing the show, the Duke 390 was released as an entry point into the KTM lifestyle. It made 43 horsepower and 26 foot-pounds of torque, tipping the scales at 340 pounds wet. It was also dirt cheap, with new models only $5,499, coming with a TFT, fully adjustable suspension, backlit controls, and all sorts of other goodies. As a side note, if you're a beginner and watching this video, I'm going to spoil the ending here. Just buy the 390. There's no other Duke that's appropriate for a beginner, and the 390 is such a fun, happy, wheelie-loving little machine. Not only that, it's better than all the other Japanese beginner bikes put together, mostly because the GSX-R 250R is in the back huffing paint, bringing down their averages. But anyway, you've probably noticed that there's a little bit of a gap in the KTM lineup now. It's kind of hard to go from a 43 horsepower beginner bike to a 180 horsepower unicycle, so in 2018, KTM decided to build a brand new platform from the ground up to split the difference. What they came up with was a 799cc parallel twin engine using a 285-degree crankshaft designed to mimic power delivery and the exhaust note of the other KTM 75-degree V twins, while being a more compact and lighter engine. It makes 105 horse and 63 foot-pounds of torque, weighing in at a featherweight 383 pounds wet. It was the first middleweight naked bike to feature an IMU, which is pretty wild. It also packs a full suite of electronics. It's got a TFT display, ride-by-wire, power modes, adjustable traction, and a bi-directional quick shifter, which you know we do love here at Yammie Noob. Somehow they managed to cram all that into a bike that weighs less than an MT-07, and they only charged $10,500 for it. When it first came out, everyone loved it, saying that it took all the best parts of the other bikes in the middleweight class and combined it into a bike with razor-sharp handling, befitting its nickname, the Scalpel. Then, for some reason, KTM decided almost immediately overnight to release the Duke 890, as if to shame all those people who bought the 790 Duke overnight. Now, I'm not entirely sure why they did this, since it's basically kneecapped the 790 and made it kind of superfluous. The 890 uses the same frame, but sees a bump in both bore and stroke, beefing up the mid-range and top-end power. It's still a 285-degree parallel twin, but it's 890cc on the dot and puts down 119 horsepower and 79 foot-pounds of torques, and somehow it's 8 pounds lighter than the 790 at 375 pounds wet and ready to ride. Just for comparison, the Yamaha R1 weighs 441 pounds and makes 83 foot-pounds of torque. Not only that, it does have the same electronics as the 790, but it features a fully adjustable WP Apex suspension, Brembo style calipers like you'd find on a Panigale, a Brembo master cylinder, and a Magura hydraulic clutch. It's basically ready to carve up a track right out of the showroom, and it's only $1,200 more. Now, I do tend to think that the 890 fits a very strange place in the world of track-ready motorcycles, seeing that it is a naked bike and the ergonomics and aerodynamics aren't exactly there for you to carve up racetracks, but it can be a ton of fun still, and it's going to be a lot easier on your back after you do session after session. So the 890 is a really interesting bike in my opinion. Now, before we compare the 790 and 890 to the competition, we need to address the big orange elephant in the room, and that is reliability. KTMs aren't exactly known as bulletproof, with the acronym commonly being jokingly referred to as keep the manual, with the now famously faulty 390 engines blowing head gaskets to electrical issues to the bikes running really hot. Basically, the only bike that could be considered reliable is the Super Duke, and that's down to the fact that KTM's been cranking out the LC8 engine for decades. The LC4 is close, with it getting major rebuild in 2019, but as it stands, the KTM Parallel Twin is a bit unproven. It also doesn't help that in 2021, KTM will be moving production of the Parallel Twins to China. However, they do ship the bike with a 24-month warranty, which guarantees the frame, swing arm, ignition system, and engine internals. Caveat emptor. Now, the 790 is too pokey for the 650 class and completely outgunned in the middleweight class, which starts the bidding at around 115 horsepower. However, what it does have is a fancy whiz-bang features that you just don't see on other bikes. It's also much lighter than the rest, so while you are down on power, you can absolutely keep up. But honestly, it's just not worth it when the Duke 890 exists. Just save your pennies and get the bigger bike. With that out of the way, let's compare the 890 bike for bike against the stars of the middleweight class. Up first, we have the old standby, the peanut butter and jelly sandwich of motorcycling and unicycle fun, the MT-09. The MT-09 makes 114 horsepower and 64 foot-pounds of torque, which is less than the Duke. It's heavier at 414 pounds, and it practically is ancient by comparison. The only thing that it does have is a cheap $8,999 price tag, though it's not exactly cheap enough to make up for the lack of tech to be worth it. If you're willing to put up with some European quirks, the Duke 890 is definitely the way to go. Next, we have the Z900, making more horsepower but less torque at 125 and 73 respectively. It's a beefy boy at 463 pounds, but is the most technologically advanced middleweight coming out of Japan nowadays. However, its suspension leaves a little to be desired, and while it does have a TFT dash and rider modes, it doesn't nearly have the level of adjustability that what the Duke does. However, the base model comes in at $8,399, which for a bike that has most of the features of the Duke, it does make a pretty strong argument. I would recommend the Duke for the performance-oriented rider who wants to take their bike to the track several times a year or who really just wants the bleeding-edge tech. The Z900 is a proven, reliable platform though, and while the Duke isn't, so bear that in mind. Finally, let's compare it to the European rival, the Street Triple RS. To get the same level of power and tech as the Duke, you need to go with the top spec Street Triple, which costs $12,850. It makes 121 horsepower and 58 foot-pounds of torque and weighs in at 410 pounds. Triumph doesn't give wet weights because, of course, they don't. It has similar features from the suspension, the dash, to the brakes, but the Duke still has the edge. It's lighter and cheaper too. The Street Triple does have a little bit better build quality and fit and finish with the metal gas tank and less plastic parts, but I'm not exactly convinced it's worth an extra $1,500 for it. When KTM built the Duke 890, they made a motorcycle that redefined the middleweight class and pushed the envelope for both price and features. If you're in the market for a naked bike from Europe, I suggest you look no further.
Hey, you adorable little squid. Thanks for watching the video. Why don't you click on this one right here and keep watching? Don't worry, I'll wait. Just like this. Click the video. Do it now.